Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we take a stack of the most innovative and often really surprising source material from the world's leading experts, and we turn it into a comprehensive blueprint for you. Today we are tackling something huge, something we've started calling the Total Wellness Blueprint.
Right.
And this is so much more complex than just, standard health advice.
Yeah.
We're going to connect the dots between your deep emotional life, the fuel you put in your body, and your physical longevity in ways that are precise, actionable, and frankly, pretty revolutionary.
That really is the core mission today. We're synthesizing these incredible insights from researchers, clinicians, behavioral experts, people like Dr. Christopher Palmer on metabolic psychiatry, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on muscle health, the relationship guru Esther Perel.
And even Alex Honnold, the climber?
And even Alex Honnold. We are moving entirely beyond those generic wellness platitudes. We're here to show you exactly how these areas that seem so separate, the brain, the metabolism, your habits, are all just components of one single integrated system.
And you know what grabbed me immediately in this material? It was the absolute aha moments. We have sources here that provide clinical evidence that a chronic, unaddressed, emotional pattern like maybe the way you handle confrontation, or that lifelong inability you have to just slow down.
Right.
It isn't just making you tired. It is physically overriding the benefits of your super clean organic diet and your dedicated morning workout.
It's literally canceling it out.
Exactly. That connection between a repressed emotion and actual heart plaque. That's the kind of deep insight we want you to walk away with. So let's jump right into probably the biggest surprise we found, the fundamental physical link between your brain and your metabolism.
When we talk about conditions like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, the standard medical conversation for, the last 50 years has been almost exclusively about neurotransmitter.
Right, the chemical imbalance idea.
The chemical imbalance. Serotonin, dopamine. But Dr. Christopher Palmer, he's really leading a movement that posits a truly revolutionary view. He argues that we should be treating many of these severe mental disorders not just as psychological issues, but as systemic metabolic disorders of the brain.
Okay, that is a fundamental shift in framing. Because when I hear metabolic disorder, my mind instantly goes to, type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. How does that concept translate up to the brain?
It forces us to ask a totally different question about the root cause.
Okay.
It suggests the problem isn't primarily that you're just low on serotonin. Instead, the root issue lies with how the brain's power centers, the mitochondria, are functioning and processing fuel.
So the energy infrastructure.
The energy infrastructure.
Wow.
If that's compromised, if the mitochondria are inefficient or damaged or they can't switch fuel sources, then the whole system starts to fail. And that systemic metabolic breakdown, it manifests in the symptoms we call severe mental illness.
And the implication is, if the problem is metabolic,
then the treatment should include metabolic tools.
And the evidence here isn't just a theory, it's stunningly specific. And it focuses on a tool most of us associate with weight loss, the ketogenic diet.
Right, and the sources detail this one patient story that it drives the point home so powerfully.
That's extraordinary.
It really is. I mean, think about the scale of the illness here. We're talking about a patient who had lived with chronic treatment-resistant schizophrenia for 53 years.
53 years.
On heavy antipsychotic medications the whole time. When this person adopted a strict ketogenic diet, a metabolic intervention, the results were just transformational. It surpassed decades of medication.
So what happened? Was it just like a reduction in symptoms?
No, this is the incredible part. It was full sustained remission.
Wow.
The patient not only achieved full remission, but was eventually taken off all antipsychotic medication completely.
And for how long?
And he remained completely symptom-free for an incredible 15 years, lived a full life until passing away at 85. So you have 53 years of illness, just reversed, for 15 years, purely through a fundamental shift in cellular fuel.
That just challenges everything we thought we knew. The fact that he maintained it for a decade and a half suggests this wasn't just, masking symptoms.
No.
This was a root cause correction. It was addressing that energy failure in the brain.
Absolutely. And while that anecdote is powerful, the clinical validation is now moving really, really fast. This is not fringe science anymore. We're seeing major institutions committing serious resources. There are currently 20 different research trials underway globally looking at this exact connection. And crucially, the Wellcome Trust, one of the world's largest biomedical research charities, has committed a massive massive $10 million grant specifically to study the keto diet versus standard treatment for bipolar disorder.
$10 million. When you see that level of institutional money shifting towards dietary tools for mental illness, you know a paradigm shift is happening.
It's a huge signal, a major shift in how we understand and treat the mind.
And that sets the stage so well for our next section, which moves from the strictly metabolic to the psycho-emotional. Dr. Ranesh Sinha, he highlights how the way we manage or maybe mismanage our emotional life. It directly feeds into that same metabolic picture we were just talking about. We tend to categorize stress as mental, right?
Right.
But he argues that constantly suppressing emotions or living in that nonstop high achievement mode, it's not just psychological exhaustion, it is a literal driver of physical disease.
And this is where we have to look under the hood at the mechanism. It's physiological. When you're in that state of chronic emotional suppression, or you're just perpetually driving yourself,
That high alert state.
that high alert, chronic, low-level stress, you are constantly activating your sympathetic nervous system. That's your fight or flight response. And when that system is always on,
You're bathed in stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline.
exactly. And those hormones aren't just making you feel jittery, they're initiating a chemical cascade. That constant hormonal barrage drives chronic inflammation and the steady release of what are called inflammatory cytokines.
So you could be eating the cleanest diet.
You could be eating perfectly organic, exercising 5 days a week, but if you have this perpetual low-level internal war raging, the emotional suppression, those inflammatory markers, they literally override the benefits of your healthy behaviors. They are powerful enough to negate your clean lifestyle.
We need to put a name to these internal battles. Dr. Sinha outlined 3 specific chronic emotional patterns that are major culprits.
Yeah, and they're patterns that I think most people fall into at some point, but living there chronically is the real danger.
So what are they?
First, there's pushing. That's the relentless achievement drive, the inability to slow down, the belief that your productivity equals your self-worth.
Okay, I know a few people like that. Maybe I am that person.
Right. Second is bracing. That's hypervigilance, constantly anticipating disaster, scanning the room for threats.
The constant state of readiness.
Exactly. And third is muting, which is the suppression of genuine emotional responses. You stuff down your anger, your sadness to maintain harmony or avoid conflict. All 3 keep the body's emergency system on red alert.
And the physiological consequences of these patterns are perfectly illustrated by the anecdote of Sheila. This story, for me, just crystallized the physical danger of it all.
The story of Sheila it's just the starkest reminder. She was only 38 years old. By all external measures, a health superstar.
Right. 8 organic exercise daily.
Tracked her macros, all of it. Yet she came to Dr. Sinha with signs of metabolic dysfunction, and tests revealed she had developed massive, dangerous heart plaque.
And that's the irony. If you looked at her food journal, you'd assume she was immune to heart disease.
Precisely. After ruling out all the usual suspects, she wasn't sedentary, she didn't smoke, her lipids were fine, Dr. Sinha traced the root cause back to her personality pattern. Since she was 9 years old, Sheila had been a relentless pusher. She could never rest, never slow down, never truly process downtime.
And that lifelong drive.
That lifelong drive kept her stress hormones elevated, spiking adrenaline and, critically, driving constant inflammation that damaged her arteries, which eventually resulted in that plaque buildup. Her perfect diet couldn't outrun the physiological impact of her emotional state.
That's profound. She was feeding her body clean fuel, but the engine was perpetually redlining from emotional pressure, and it resulted in structural failure. Mindset isn't a soft skill, it's a physiological input. So if that nonstop high alert mode is driving all this inflammation, the immediate question is, how do we break the cycle? We need some concrete techniques.
Right, from problem to solution.
Let's start with just handling the thoughts and emotions themselves.
The sources offer a method called Headflix, which is a perfect, really accessible entry point into open monitoring meditation.
Headflix, I like that.
Yeah. The instinctual response to a difficult emotion, like anger or anxiety, is to either suppress it, which is muting, or fight it, which is bracing. Both of those just increase the fight or flight response.
Right.
Headflix teaches you to do neither. Instead, you consciously observe the thought or the emotion as if it were an actor on a movie screen. You are the impartial viewer, the audience, not the director or a participant in the scene.
And what's so compelling is that this isn't just, some woo-woo spiritual advice. There's specific neuroscience that backs this up. It relates to the simple act of labeling.
That's a critical piece of data from a UCLA study. When subjects are instructed to just label an emotional state, to say internally that is anger or that is a thought of anxiety, it causes a measurable shift in brain activity.
From where to where?
Activity decreases in the amygdala, the immediate threat, fear, and fight center, and it shifts forward to the prefrontal cortex, which is the center for reasoning and logic.
So by just naming it, you interrupt the panic and engage the part of your brain that can manage it.
You immediately gain distance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about that relentless inner critic, which often fuels the pushing pattern we mentioned. How do we reduce its power?
So therapist Amita Schmidt provides this really powerful visualization technique. She suggests recognizing that the critic often feels so immediate and overwhelming, right?
Like a voice right in your ear.
A voice in your ear, a weight on your chest. To disrupt that, you visualize the critic as a small, insignificant object, maybe a tiny couch.
A tiny couch, okay.
And then you place that tiny couch inside a massive cavernous space, like an airplane hangar.
The hangar is the key. Why is that so effective?
Because the critic is still there on its tiny couch, but the space of your awareness, the hangar, is now so vast that you aren't constantly bumping into it. It's not inescapable anymore. It's a small, distant sound in a huge room of perspective.
I love that. It creates instant psychological detachment.
It really does.
So let's transition that mental space into the real world, especially for people who struggle with work stress spilling over into their home life. Dr. Guy Winch makes a very important distinction here.
He clarifies that if you are cognitively exhausted, passive relaxation is not the same as true recharging.
Right. So coming home and just slumping on the couch and scrolling your phone?
Yeah.
That's not it.
That is passive. It's not helping. It gives your mind more easy, low-quality input, but it doesn't restore cognitive energy. If mental exhaustion is the core problem, you need active engagement, a complex hobby, an activity that requires focus, a different type of exercise to truly shift your mental state. Slouching won't cut it.
So the brain needs a clear signal that the workday is over, that identity is sealed off. How do we engineer that?
Dr. Winch's solution is the transition ritual. Your brain is still revved up. It needs a concrete physical signal that the emergency is over.
So what would that look like?
It has to be physical and non-negotiable. It could be changing out of your work clothes the moment you walk in the door, or adjusting the lighting and temperature, or playing a specific 5-minute piece of music every single day. This conscious sensory action tells your nervous system the environment has changed, the stress state is now physically sealed off and contained. It's a deliberate way to break that loop.
Okay, and finally, what about rumination? Those persistent, draining thought loops we just can't seem to drop.
The most powerful technique for that is to convert the draining emotion into a soluble problem. You stop the loop by imposing radical clarity. You ask yourself, do I need to address this right now? Is this actionable? If the answer is yes, you immediately convert the anxiety into a discrete action item, and you schedule a specific time in the next 48 hours to plan a solution. You treat it like a meeting.
And if the answer is no?
If the answer is definitively no, it's out of your control, it's in the past, you consciously drop it, maybe using the head flicks or the airplane hanger technique. The goal is to remove the ambiguity that keeps the mental engine running nonstop.
We've established that the body is one integrated system. Emotional stress causes physical inflammation. Now, let's look at the actual physical hardware of longevity, starting with the vascular system. Because blood flow is everything.
It's fundamental, and this is where a common, often ignored symptom suddenly becomes a critical, time-sensitive warning system for your heart.
You're talking about erectile dysfunction. And the sources, specifically biohacker Dave Asprey, label this not just as a bedroom problem, but as a major vascular issue.
And a frighteningly specific 3 to 5 year warning signal for a potential heart attack.
That window is short. That's terrifying.
It is, and the physiology behind it is undeniable. It comes down entirely to anatomy, the plumbing system. If systemic plaque or inflammation is building up, where's the first place that constriction becomes evident?
In the narrowest pipes.
The narrowest pipes. And in the body, those are in the penis. The arteries supplying the penis are tiny, only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter.
Okay. And how does that compare to the heart?
Well, the vital coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart are wider, 3 to 4 millimeters wide. So if you have vascular disease starting, the vessels that are half the diameter are just going to clog first.
So ED is basically the body's early check engine light.
Yeah.
If blood flow is restricted there, trouble is inevitably brewing for your heart.
It's the canary in the coal mine.
And I think so many people just dismiss it as a hormonal issue or just part of aging. Framing it as a vascular alarm bell is a complete game changer. It demands action.
It demands immediate, aggressive intervention.
Right.
And the specific protocol recommended in the sources is a multi-pronged attack on that inflammation and constriction.
Okay, let's detail that protocol. It's a combination of a few different things.
It focuses on 3 key areas. First, actively promoting blood flow via mild vasodilation, often with microdosing Cialis, typically 5 milligrams daily.
Okay.
Second, managing systemic platelet aggregation using a baby aspirin, 81 milligrams, unless, of course, it's medically contraindicated for you. And third, focusing on the infrastructure itself, using supplements like Ordosil, which are designed specifically to protect and rebuild the glycocalyx.
Okay, you just dropped a piece of technical jargon. The glycocalyx. Can you define that for us?
Absolutely. It's crucially important. Think of the glycocalyx as this highly delicate, gel-like, non-stick coating on the inside of every single blood vessel you have.
Like Teflon for your arteries.
Exactly like Teflon for your arteries. When it's healthy, things like cholesterol and inflammatory markers just glide right past. Plaque has trouble sticking. When that lining is degraded, often by high blood sugar or inflammation, it becomes sticky. And once it's compromised, plaque formation just accelerates dramatically.
So these supplements are aimed at restoring that internal non-stick layer.
So if the vascular system is the plumbing, then Dr. Gabrielle repositions muscle as the absolute engine, the central organ of longevity.
Which is a new way of thinking for a lot of people. For decades, we've viewed muscle just in terms of performance or, aesthetics.
But she argues it's fundamental to survival and metabolic health. Her core thesis is that your muscle mass dictates your health span, not just your lifespan.
How so?
Muscle is the body's primary site for glucose disposal. It's like a sponge for blood sugar. When you lose muscle, you lose the ability to manage blood sugar, which leads to metabolic dysfunction, chronic inflammation, and overall fragility.
And that age-related muscle loss is called sarcopenia.
Sarcopenia, and it dramatically increases overall disease risk. And we saw that direct link. Low muscle mass is associated with a staggering 73% greater risk of erectile dysfunction.
Wow, so it all connects back. Lack of muscle contributes to frailty, but also to systemic metabolic and vascular problems.
It's all one system.
So foundational strength is non-negotiable. The sources detail her foundational 5 exercises, which aren't about complex bodybuilding, but about building a robust, injury-resistant base.
Right. These 5 movements target crucial stabilizing muscles. They include the standing calf raise with adduction, which focuses on calf strength and inner thigh stability.
Overlooked.
Totally. Then the single leg RDL, or Romanian deadlift, which is fantastic for the whole posterior chain glutes and hamstrings, while also challenging your balance and core stability.
Which is so important as we age.
Vital. Then the hip airplane, which is a mobility and control movement for the hip joint, key for preventing knee and back pain. Then the 90-90 breathing exercise, which integrates core strength with proper breathing mechanics. And finally, the bird dog, which focuses on coordinated stability and spinal safety. These 5 movements create a durable body.
What stands out in her approach is the emphasis on different types of loading. She even drew on her own experience recovering from a major injury.
Right, and that brings us to the power of isometrics, or static holds. When she tore her hamstring, she used these static holds, contracting the muscle without moving the joint, to rehabilitate the tendon.
Why is that better for a tendon?
The critical distinction here is that tendons heal much slower than muscle tissue, and they require a different loading stimulus. Isometrics are perfect for increasing strength and blood flow to those vulnerable tendons and ligaments without the shearing forces of dynamic movement.
It's a reminder that you have to train intelligently.
Right. And that idea of intelligent training consistency over constant grinding is even echoed by elite athletes. We see 2x HYROX world champion Meg Martin prioritizing recovery as a performance enhancer.
What does she recommend?
She advises limiting high-intensity workouts, the heavy lifting, or true HIIT, to just 2 or 3 sessions per week. The rest of her training is dedicated to low-intensity, conversational pace, zone 2 cardio, which aids recovery.
And sleep.
And an absolute non-negotiable commitment to 8 or more hours of sleep. The body only adapts and builds strength during recovery, not during the workout itself. If you neglect rest, you negate all the hard work.
Okay, so sticking with the theme of aging, we know the immune system degrades. Dr. Anurag Singh details a fascinating discovery. Part of this immune decay actually happens directly in the muscle tissue.
Yeah, the immune cells in our muscles degenerate over time, so the body's defense system relies directly on the health of its muscle cells.
And the practical solution identified here is a postbiotic that's synthesized from pomegranates, urolithin A. What is it doing at the cellular level?
Urolithin A helps drive a process called mitophagy,
Mitophagy.
which is literally the recycling of damaged mitochondria. Mitochondria are the power plants of every cell, and they accumulate damage over time. Mitophagy is the system that cleans out the old broken power plants to make way for new efficient ones.
So it's cellular cleanup.
It's cellular cleanup, and by supporting this, urolithin A helps rejuvenate the power supply, especially within the highly energetic immune cells.
And there's good clinical data on this from a randomized controlled trial in Nature Aging.
Yes, the trial focused on adults over 50. It demonstrated that just 1 month of urolithin A supplementation significantly improved mitochondrial function in their immune cells. But the key takeaway for longevity was the increase in naive T cells.
Can you quickly define what naive T cells are and why that's a big deal?
Naive T cells are essentially fresh, inexperienced immune fighter cells. They haven't encountered a pathogen yet, which means they're ready to learn and mount a specific, robust defense against any new threat. A new virus, a cancer cell.
And as we age, our supply of those shrinks.
Dramatically, which makes our immune system less flexible. So by increasing these cells, the supplement is effectively rolling back the immune clock, making the body's defense system younger and more adaptive.
This sounds amazing, but can everyone get this benefit just by eating pomegranates?
Unfortunately, no, and that's the crucial caveat. Only about 30% of the population has the specific gut bacteria needed to metabolize the compounds in pomegranates into usable urolithin A.
So for the other 70%,
For the other 70%, supplementation is necessary. And the optimal strategy outlined is combining that targeted supplementation with resistance training around 30 minutes, 3 times a week, because that muscle stress signals the cells to accelerate that cleanup process, maximizing the effect.
speaking of cellular cleanup, let's look at another cutting-edge strategy, stem cells and senolytics, which is clearing out zombie cells. Dr. Dan Party's approach shifts the focus from external injections to supporting the body's internal repair mechanism.
Right, what he calls the stem cell neighborhood. And that neighborhood is constantly being poisoned by senescent cells, the zombie cells.
Why zombie cells?
Because they're metabolically alive, but they refuse to die when they should. They just linger, and they spew out these inflammatory signals that degrade the healthy tissue around them, accelerate aging, and inhibit repair. So clearing them out is a huge focus of longevity research.
And the sources detail a structured, precise senolytic protocol for this. This isn't a daily vitamin, it's a pulsed intervention.
It is. It's entirely structured around creating a temporary metabolic stressor that mimics fasting, because fasting forces the body into cleanup mode. The protocol begins with a low-protein dinner, followed by a low-protein breakfast the next morning.
Why low protein?
The goal of the low protein is to actively suppress the anabolic signaling pathways, specifically one called mTOR, which tells the body to grow and build. If you suppress mTOR, the body starts to favor cleanup, or autophagy.
You're turning off the growth signal to trigger the demolition crew. What's next?
Next, you introduce a physical stressor, a high-intensity interval training HIIT workout. This acute stress further signals the body to clean up damaged cells.
And then the supplements.
Finally, during this recovery window, you take the senolytic supplements, like Qualia Senolytic, which contain compounds like fisetin or quercetin that actively help trigger the death signal in those zombie cells. After that intense 24-hour cycle, you go back to normal eating, letting the body recover and use that newly cleared space.
Now, all of this optimization relies on having accurate data. But Dr. Amy Horniman reveals a common, critical vulnerability. Patient misdiagnosis, particularly with the thyroid, simply because people take lab tests improperly.
This is such a foundational issue. You can have the best plan in the world, but if your initial data is flawed, the whole thing is built on sand. Thyroid hormones, especially T3, are incredibly sensitive to timing, food, and common supplements, and labs often don't provide patients with the strict protocol needed, leading to wildly inaccurate results.
Okay, so we need to give the listener these 3 strict rules for getting reliable thyroid labs.
Right.
What's rule 1?
Rule 1. You must test before 9 a.m. and while completely fasted. Thyroid hormones follow a strong circadian rhythm. Your levels naturally peak in the very early morning.
And if you test later?
If you test at 11 a.m. or noon, you'll get an artificially low reading. And your doctor might think your thyroid function is fine when it's actually compromised. You have to capture that morning peak.
Okay, and what about people who are already on thyroid medication, especially those with T3?
That is rule 2, and it's non-negotiable. You must hold the medication for 18 to 24 hours prior to the blood draw. T3 has a very short half-life.
Yeah.
If you take your pill in the morning and test an hour later, you'll see a false, temporary spike in your blood levels.
A false high.
A false high. It makes it look like your medication is working perfectly when your true baseline might be totally inadequate.
And the third rule challenge is a very popular supplement. Wait, biotin. I take that for my hair and nails. Are you telling me that could lead to a complete misdiagnosis?
Absolutely. That is rule 3. You must completely avoid biotin supplements for 5 to 7 full days before your blood draw.
Why?
It's not that biotin is harmful to your body, it's that it actively interferes with the lab's equipment. The majority of thyroid assays use biotin to help tag and measure the thyroid molecules. If you have excess biotin floating around in your blood, it muddles the signal, resulting in dramatically inaccurate readings. It breaks the data collection mechanism.
Let's talk fueling the machine. The gut is ground zero for, well, for everything. Immune function, mental health, nutrient absorption. Dr. Will Bulsiewicz simplifies the complex world of the microbiome by focusing on 4 crucial elements, his workhorses.
Right, this simplifies it away from counting specific bacterial strains. The 4 workhorses are fiber, which is the food for your good bacteria, polyphenols, those colorful compounds in plants that act as prebiotics and antioxidants, healthy fats for cell membranes, and finally, fermented foods.
And their emphasis on fermented foods is huge. We have concrete clinical evidence on its impact.
The Stanford study is fantastic proof of concept. Researchers tracked subjects who significantly increased their intake of things like kefir, sauerkraut, kombucha for just 8 weeks.
It's 8 weeks.
And the results were dramatic. A measurable increase in overall gut diversity and, critically, a significant 25% drop in inflammatory markers.
Wow.
So it confirms that actively feeding your microbiome quickly translates to reduced systemic inflammation, which connects all the way back to the mental stress section we started with.
So we want fiber and diversity. But we need a critical warning here, distinguishing between fiber in whole foods and the isolated fiber added to processed products. The sources flag isolated inulin in carbonated drinks.
This is such an essential nuance. Fiber in an apple is beneficial because it comes packaged with other nutrients. But isolated fibers like inulin, which are often added to health drinks to boost the fiber count, can pose risks when consumed in high concentrations.
What kind of risks?
We saw studies showing that overconsumption can lead to abnormal liver tests in humans. Even more concerning, rodent studies linked overconsumption to the development of liver cancer in rats. It shows that separating a nutrient from its whole food matrix just drastically changes the body's reaction.
And finally, let's tie the gut back to our behavior. It turns out your morning routine is a direct digestive aid.
Absolutely. Dr. Bulsiewicz points out that morning sunlight exposure acts as a powerful digestive stimulant. When that light hits your retina, it signals the hypothalamus, which causes your cortisol levels to increase by about 50%. That surge of cortisol acts as the timestamp for your entire circadian system, telling the body it's morning. And a critical part of that signal is the stimulation of paracelsus, the muscular contractions that move waste through the digestive tract.
So getting outside first thing isn't just for your mood.
It's literally setting your digestive clock.
Okay, moving from the gut to the plate. We've all been subjected to endless generic diet rules. Dietitian Ashley Koff makes a powerful argument against this rigid one-size-fits-all approach.
Her philosophy is that personalized nutrition must begin with one foundational step no matter what, and that is digestion must be fixed first. If your body's machinery is broken, if you're inflamed, low on stomach acid, then throwing the cleanest, most organic food at it won't work. The body can't absorb the nutrients if the intake mechanism is flawed. Fix the function, then adjust the fuel.
And the patient story of Mr. Pizza Pop is the perfect counterintuitive illustration of this.
He was a bariatric surgery candidate, a high-stress executive with uncontrolled diabetes whose lifestyle included eating an entire large pizza late at night.
It's a disaster.
By all conventional metrics, a disaster. But Kokoff resisted the urge to impose immediate rigid restrictions. She focused her initial efforts on 2 variables. First, fixing his digestion with targeted supplements like magnesium and glutamine. And second, she drastically changed the timing of his poor food choices.
So he was allowed to keep eating the pizza.
He was, but the rule was strict. He had to eat 3 slices every 3 hours, starting early in the morning and stop in the late afternoon. This shifted his carbohydrate load to when his body was most active and insulin sensitive.
And what was the outcome of this approach?
The outcome was remarkable. Because his body could suddenly process the fuel efficiently, and because it was time to maximize glucose disposal, he lost 51 pounds and, crucially, was able to get off his diabetes medication entirely.
That's incredible. It proves that optimizing the body's machinery and timing can be far more powerful in the beginning than just following arbitrary good food rules.
It's all about function first.
And for making those food choices, KOF offers a simple, practical rating tool, the Delicious to Me test.
It's a genius piece of behavioral engineering. Before you take a bite, rate the food on a scale of 1 to 10. How much do you truly want it? If it doesn't rate a 7 or higher, don't eat it.
Right. It eliminates that passive, mindless eating.
Exactly. And it's especially vital for patients on GLP-1 medications because those drugs often fundamentally alter taste perception. The 7+ rule reestablishes a mindful connection to food enjoyment.
So following up on personalized fueling, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon provides clear, actionable numbers for managing carbohydrate intake, particularly for the sedentary majority.
Right, a specific threshold.
What is that baseline limit for starchy carbs per meal for someone who isn't exercising regularly?
For a sedentary individual, she advises limiting starchy carbohydrates to roughly 40 grams per meal. That's the practical threshold suggested to ensure efficient glucose disposal into the muscle cells without overwhelming the system and triggering an excessive insulin response.
Well, 40 grams. That might be surprising to some. But the body can be trained to handle much more, and this is where exercise comes in.
Absolutely. Exercise allows you to earn your carbs. When you engage in intense activity, specifically getting your heart rate over 120 beats per minute, you temporarily increase the insulin sensitivity in your muscle cells. You open up new pathways for glucose uptake.
So what's the modification?
For every hour of exercise where you sustain that elevated heart rate, you can add an additional 40 to 70 grams of carbohydrates. It confirms that metabolic health isn't about rigid restriction. It's about balancing energy input with energy expenditure.
Let's return to the metabolic thread we started with. Dr. Ben Bikman provides a crucial insight into ketones. They've long been viewed simply as an alternative fuel source for the brain when glucose is scarce.
Right, but his research expands their role dramatically. Ketones, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate or BHB, are not merely backup fuel. They are powerful signaling molecules that actively reduce systemic inflammation.
So they have a therapeutic role, regardless of whether you're in nutritional ketosis.
Exactly. An anti-inflammatory role independent of their function as an energy source.
And the sources detailed two incredibly potent specific mechanisms for this. Let's make sure we define these clearly.
The first mechanism is the inhibition of the NLRP3 inflammasome. You need to think of the NLRP3 inflammasome as the cellular alarm bell that rings nonstop in chronic diseases like Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes. It's a major protein complex that drives the production of chronic inflammation.
And BHB does what to it?
BHB acts as a direct inhibitor. It actively dampens that dangerous nonstop alarm ringing at the cellular level.
So ketones are physically turning off the inflammation machine. What's the second pathway?
The second pathway involves gene expression. BHB actively inhibits specific enzymes called histone deacetylases, or HDACs. HDACs typically keep certain protective genes silenced or turned off.
Okay.
By inhibiting these HDACs, BHB effectively acts as a switch, turning on powerful antioxidant and protective genes, like one called FOXO3A. When FOXO3A is activated, it bolsters the body's innate defense systems against oxidative stress. So BHB is both shutting down chronic inflammation and activating the body's internal repair systems.
We've established the physical blueprint. Now we move to the final piece, behavioral engineering. And we have to start with the cornerstone of repair and longevity sleep. Dr. Matthew Walker issues these incredibly strong warnings about disrupting the body's deep genetic rhythm.
This is maybe the most frightening data point we reviewed. A pivotal 2013 UK study on sleep deprivation tracked gene expression. They found that just one single week of sleeping only 6 hours a night which, let's be honest, is what many high achievers maintain.
Guilty.
It significantly altered the expression of 711 genes.
711 genes. In 7 days. That is a massive systemic disruption. Which genes were impacted?
The disruption was alarming. Genes responsible for crucial immune function and repair were substantially downregulated, so your body's natural ability to fight illness was compromised.
And what was upregulated?
Conversely, genes known to be involved in the promotion of tumors and chronic inflammatory processes were upregulated. It just clearly illustrates that you cannot override the need for sleep without fundamentally altering your biological risk profile.
And the immediate physical consequences are distinct, even after just one all-nighter.
That acute sleep deprivation has specific, immediate metabolic consequences. An all-nighter pushes the body into a catabolic state where muscle tissue begins to break down for energy.
So it eats away at that organ of longevity we just talked about.
Exactly. And at the same time, fat tissue is signaled to store energy more aggressively. If this becomes chronic, the cumulative effect is that skinny fat body composition, where you lose muscle and retain fat, severely impairing your metabolic health. Moving to actionable lifestyle changes, one of the most impactful resets involves alcohol. Dr. Mark Hyman recommends a deliberate 30-day reset, like a dry January, not as self-punishment, but as a systematic strategy to reset metabolic and cognitive function.
Can you lay out the physiological timeline? What benefits can people expect week by week?
The benefits unfold sequentially. Week 1 is primarily cellular rehydration and repairing the immediate damage to the liver and gut lining. You just start to feel physically better. By week 2, the central nervous system begins to fully recover, which results in a measurable clearing of brain fog and improved focus. Week 3 sees a significant lowering of systemic inflammation across the board. And by week 4, you start to see measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity, correcting a major metabolic issue driven by chronic alcohol use. It's a full system reboot.
The psychological barrier, though, is often that feeling of deprivation.
Right.
That you're giving something up.
Right. And James Swanwick offers a psychological hack for that. He advises reframing the action to focus on the gain, not the loss. Instead of saying you're giving up alcohol, reframe it as choosing an alcohol-free lifestyle.
How does that trick the brain?
It's designed to trick your brain's reticular activating system, or RAS. The RAS acts like a filter, focusing your attention on what's relevant. If you say giving up, the RAS focuses on the pain. If you say choosing a lifestyle, the RAS focuses on the gains, better health, clarity, more energy making. It feels like a positive choice, not a sacrifice.
Once we choose that lifestyle, we have to build the habits. And that brings us to James Clear's powerful technique of 5-minute mastery.
This is such a beautiful lesson in prioritizing behavior mastery over intensity mastery. Clear cites the story of Mitch, who wanted to start working out but struggled. Mitch didn't force himself to do a strenuous workout. He committed to going to the gym for only 5 minutes daily for 6 weeks. The goal wasn't to build muscle. The goal was solely to master the habit of showing up. Once that behavior loop was completely automatic, increasing the intensity to 60 minutes became easy. And the foundation of all this sustained behavior is confidence. We're often taught to wait for confidence to appear before we take action, but experts like Dr. Zarai and Lewis Howes reinforce this crucial idea. Confidence is a result of action, not a prerequisite.
You have to act your way into believing in yourself.
Exactly.
So if action builds confidence, then we have to find ways to take action even when we feel fear. That's the utility of micro-bravery.
Micro-bravery is the strategy of systematically desensitizing yourself to fear by performing small, low-risk actions that cause mild discomfort.
Like what?
It could be anything. Speaking up in a meeting, asking a stranger a simple question, taking a slightly harder workout class. By doing these things repeatedly, you teach your brain, through low-stakes exposure, that the perceived threat isn't actually dangerous. You're building an internal library of successes.
And nobody embodies the mastery of fear better than Alex Honnold, the free solo climber. His technique isn't about eliminating fear, it's about systematic normalization.
His approach relies on intense, structured visualization. When preparing for a climb, he doesn't just visualize success, he visualizes the texture of the rock, the humidity, and critically, he includes the worst-case scenario. He actively processes the image of falling.
So when he's actually on the wall, the feeling of fear isn't new. It's already been neutralized.
Precisely. The sensory input of fear is already normalized and expected, which makes it less intrusive. And this behavioral engineering even shows up in his brain. A 2016 brain scan famously showed that Honnold's amygdala, the fear center, responds significantly less to frightening stimuli. And he attributes that change directly to 30 years of deliberate exposure and practice.
Neuroplasticity in action. So once we're motivated, how do we set goals that actually stick? Jim Kwik points to a simple technique backed by research.
The data from a Dominican university study is compelling. Simply writing down your goals makes you 42% more likely to achieve them.
Wow.
But Kwik emphasizes that goals, the outcome, are lag measures. They're results you can't control directly. The secret is pairing them with lead measures, the daily actions you can control.
So if your goal is to get a new job,
The lag measure is getting the job. The lead measure is sending out 5 targeted applications every single morning. You focus all your energy on mastering the lead measures.
but we all miss a day. We fail sometimes. The key isn't perfection, it's resilience.
He uses the tennis reset analogy. If you miss a day of your habit, don't spiral into self-punishment. Just like a tennis player shakes off a bad serve, you immediately reset your commitment and protect your self-trust with one simple rule. Never miss twice. You guarantee the next day is a win.
And finally, for major high-stakes life decisions, Tony Robbins shared his structured OCM method.
This is a crucial framework for systematic decision-making to ensure emotional bias doesn't drive the result. It stands for outcomes, what do you want? Options, you need at least 3. Consequences, best and worst case. Evaluate probability, mitigate the downside. And resolve, make the decision and commit. He used this for a $400 million business decision.
To bring this comprehensive dive into mindset full circle, the psychotherapist Esther Perel offers a profound insight into what we lose when we live in that perpetual stress cycle. She talks about the depletion of eros.
And she defines eros not as purely sexual desire, but as the fundamental life force, the sense of aliveness and vitality. When we're constantly pushing, bracing, or muting, we are sapping that core eros.
And that chronic depletion inevitably spills out into our relationships.
Creating stress and toxicity, she defines a particularly corrosive dynamic that arises from this called hostile dependency.
Hostile dependency. That sounds exhausting. What is that cycle?
It connects directly back to the emotional suppression we discussed at the very beginning. Hostile dependency is the cycle where you become angry and resentful toward another person, your partner, your colleague, because you desperately need them to change for you to feel better.
But they won't, or they can't.
Right. You've placed the burden of regulating your own emotional state onto an external factor. This leads to a dependency that breeds resentment. If you mute your internal state and neglect your own mind management, you eventually rely on others for external repair, which results in hostility when they fail to provide it. True vitality requires internal agency first.
We've covered an enormous amount of ground in this total wellness blueprint. We started by completely dismantling that old artificial separation between mind and body, establishing that the brain is fundamentally a metabolic organ.
And it can be treated with precision metabolic tools.
Which challenges decades of traditional psychiatric thought. We then moved to the hardware of longevity, affirming that muscle mass is the key to disease resistance, and that even early signs like ED are critical, time-sensitive warnings for your heart.
And finally, we locked in on the fact that intentional habit creation, behavioral engineering, and mind management are the indispensable drivers of both confidence and physical health. The integrated takeaway is just the interconnectedness of the system, that simple transition ritual of changing your clothes when you get home. That impacts not just your stress levels, but by interrupting that stress spillover, it actively protects your cardiovascular system.
And what you eat.
What you choose to eat, or if you take a urolithin A supplement, impacts your ability to clear zombie cells and even changes how your brain processes fear, just like Alex Honnold's neuroplasticity showed us.
You now have dozens of precise, actionable strategies synthesized from the best minds in the world. So our challenge for you is simple, and it echoes the wisdom of the experts. Pick one piece of micro-bravery. Go make one choice you've been avoiding, or start that 5-minute mastery habit today. The currency of confidence is immediate action.
And if you're sitting there thinking that maybe you're too old or too set in your ways to apply these new blueprints, let us leave you with this final, provocative thought drawn from the anecdotes shared by Mark Manson. He cited the story of a woman who decided to begin learning to play the piano at the age of 62.
62.
She wasn't just noodling. She applied herself and became a truly masterful player, continuing to perform and learn new music until she passed away at the age of 92. This highlights that agency, neuroplasticity, and the ability to adopt a completely new blueprint for your life persists far, far past middle age. It is never, ever too late to engage in the deep work required to build your own total wellness blueprint.